Our next lesson is simple interest, which is very similar to what we've been doing with weighted averages. The numbers that I have circled on here are the ones that you have for homework, so I'm gonna really just go over the other problems just to help you set these up. So with simple interest, we're gonna use this formula, I equals PRT, okay? I represents the amount of interest, P represents the principal amount, which means like what your starting amount is. R represents the annual interest rate, which you'll find for the interest rate, they're gonna be in percentages. And then time is always represented by T, which is gonna be in terms of years. Okay, so it says number one, it says use I equals PRT to find the missing quantity. So number one, find I if P is 1,500, R is 12%, and T is 2 years. Okay, so we'll just plug that into the equation. I equals P, R, and notice how I'm changing the R into a decimal because we're using it with a percent, and then it's gonna be 2 years. So then all I'm gonna do, since I'm just finding the interest, I'm just gonna multiply 1,500 times 12% times 2, and I end up getting that the interest amount and its money is $360. Okay, so this is very similar to what you'll do with number 2. Okay. Number 3, Elizabeth has $3,000 in her savings account. How much interest will she earn in 3 years if the interest rate is 5.5? Okay, so we're trying to find I, interest. And notice how in this one, she has $3,000 in her savings account. That's her starting amount, so that's gonna signify your principal. And then the rates, we said 5.5, so 0.055, and then it's for 3 years. So once again, multiply those 3 numbers out, and you get $495. For number 4, Paul invested $500 for 1 year at 8%. and another sum at 12%. His total interest for the year was $580. How much did Paul invest at 12%? So with this problem, it's gonna look a little different, okay? But you have 2 different rates. So we know that he first invested $500 for 1 year at 8%. So really what we have here is we have I1, which means interest of the first investment plus interest of the second should equal the total, which this equation should look very similar to what we did when we had 2 objects that were going opposites of each other. We did the same idea here. So if we look at the interest of the first percent, and that's kind of the easiest to signify that, notice how he's investing $500 for 1 year at 8%. If you wanted to make, and I'm gonna make my little table up here, right? So if we had I1 and I2, PRT, so the principal amount for this first investment is $500, and we know it's for 1 year and it's at 8%. And then he has this other sum at 12%. It's still for the year, but we don't know that starting amount. Okay, so that's where our variable comes into place. So we're just gonna multiply these across. So 500 times 0.08, and we can write times 1, but it means the same thing, plus 0.12x times 1, but this equals 580. So if I take 500 times 8%, I get 40, plus 0.12x equals 580. Subtract 40. So I have 0.12x equals 540. I'm going to go ahead and divide by that 12%, and I end up getting that x would be 4,500. Okay, which means that he would have to invest $4,500 at 12% in order for his total interest for the year to be 580. Okay, this problem is very similar to number 5. Number 6, just read it very, very carefully because you just need to figure out like what you are solving for. So like the other ones, like in here with these, they're giving you interest is what you're solving for. For 2, be careful because you're going to solve for P. For 6, be very careful and figure out how long was the money invested. Think about what that would be for. Okay. On the back, you're going to do problems 1 and 6 only. So I'm going to do a couple of these problems just to show you how to work them out. One thing that I wanted to mention, which I forgot. Notice with number 5, just real quick, at what rate? So I'm just going to forewarn you that when you solve these, you are going to get a decimal as an answer. Remember, rates are in terms of percent. So when you get that decimal, don't forget to multiply by 100 in order to get that percentage. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do number 2, and I'm going to do a little bit of the work over here just so I have a little bit of space. Okay. So for number 2, it says Pedro invested $5,000 for 1 year. Part at 12% annual interest and the balance at 10% annual interest. His total interest for the year was $568. How much money did he invest at each rate? Okay. Now, you have that he is investing $5,000 for 1 year, okay? And part of that investment was at 12 and part of it was at 10. When we see annual, that's just telling us that our time would be 1 for 1 year. We know the total interest is $568. So this is very similar to the problem that I just did on the other side. We're going to use this equation, I1, so interest of the first one, plus interest of the second should equal 568, meaning the total amount that is of interest. Okay, so I'm going to create a table again. I'm going to make my table over here. So I have I1, I2, PRT. Okay, so since we're trying to figure out how much he's investing at each rate, this already signifies for me that I'm going to have 2 variables because I don't know how much he's investing at those. That's why I need to figure out the total. Okay. But one thing that I do know is that the total investment he made was $5,000. So I'm going to just put this down here so that I remember that not only am I going to use this equation, I1 plus I2 equals 568, but that the total amount at 12% and the total amount at 10% needs to equal $5,000. Okay. So the interest of I1, I'm going to say 12%, and I know it's for 1 year, and then I2 is at 10%, and that's for 1 year. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write my equation based off of this I1 plus I2. So 0.12x plus 0.1y equals 568. Okay, and then I have this other equation, x plus y equals 5,000. So this is where you're going to have to go with working with substitution, which is what we did a little bit with 2(9a). So it really doesn't matter which one you solve for. I'm going to go ahead and take this equation, x plus y equals 5,000, and I'm going to just say that I'm going to solve for x, or make it so that it's x equals. So x equals 5,000 minus y. So I'm going to go ahead and substitute that equation into this x here. So I have 0.12 times 5,000 minus y plus 0.1y equals 568. Oops. Okay. So notice here, now when we first started, we have two different variables. Now we have the same variable. Now we can start doing some work from here. So if I take 12% of 5,000, I get 600 minus 0.12y plus 0.1y equals 568. I'm gonna go ahead and combine like terms. So 600, and then that would be minus 0.02y equals 568. I'm gonna go ahead and subtract 600. And I'm left with negative 32 equals negative 0.02y. Divide both sides by negative 0.02. And I end up getting that y equals 1,600. Okay, and so that's only giving me the answer for one of the rates, which in this case would be the principal amount at 10%. So now I need to figure out my other amount. So all I would do is I would take this y, and just as easily, I'm just gonna plug it in here for the first equation that we came up with. So I would have x equals 5,000 minus 1,600, okay? I end up getting for this that x equals 3,400, okay? So I'm proving here that when I am solving these, I know that I'm solving for two variables. Something that I should have done originally is define my variables. Even though I know there's two of them, I need to know that x stands for the principal amount at 12%, and that y equals the principal amount at 10%. Okay. So now, let's see. So number 1 is very similar to that, and so is number 4. So I'm not going to do number 4 because number 4, that problem is very similar to 2. Number 1 and number 6 is what you have for homework. So if you wanted another practice problem, you could do number 4. Okay, we're going to go ahead and look at number 3. So it says the Rileys have $27,000 to invest. They intend to invest part of the money in certificates of deposit at 8.5%, the remainder in a savings account at 5%. If they wish to receive the same income from each investment, how much should they invest in each? Okay, so keyword here, same income. All right, when we see a problem like this, what's happening here is we're actually going to use the equation. Instead of using the total interest that they have made, because we don't know what that is, we're going to do I1 equals I2, which is very similar to our distance problems when they were starting at the same place and going the same direction. Okay, so we know, once again, I'm going to create a table. I'm going to use this section over here just to make my table. So I'm going to make one very similarly to what we did to the problem for number 2. So I have I1, I2, I have principal, rate, time. Okay, so here we go again, knowing that I don't know how much they're investing in each. Here's where I come up with my variables, x and y. So the first one, I'm going to go ahead and have this be my I1 be my certificate of deposit, and this is at 8.5%. Oops. And the second one, the savings account, is for 5%. Okay, Time, once again, is just going to be 1. So now that I know what my variables stand for, I'm going to go ahead and define them. So X is principal at 8.5%, and Y is principal at 5%. Okay? And I know that the total amount that they're investing is that $27,000. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take I1, 0.085x equals 0.05y. Okay, and now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and solve for one of the variables first, and then I'll solve for the other. So I'll go ahead this time and I'll take this equation, X plus Y equals 27,000. And I'm going to go ahead and just solve it for Y this time. So Y equals 27,000 minus X. I'm going to go ahead and take that and plug it into my equation. So I have 0.085x equals 0.05 times 27,000 minus X. Notice once again, I have my X's left over. So I have 0.085x equals, and then 5% of 27,000 is 1,350 minus 0.05x. I'm going to add this to both sides. Okay, and when I add those together, I get 0.135x equals 1,350. I'm going to divide both sides by 0.135, and I get that x equals 10,000. So what this tells me is that the Rileys would have to invest $10,000 at the 8.5%. So now I need to figure out each. So I'm going to go ahead and take this 10,000 and plug it back into this problem here. So then Y equals 27,000 minus 10,000. So I get that at the 5%, they're going to investigate $17,000. Okay. And then number 5, with number 5, it is very similar to number 6, okay? So Jake has $4,000 invested at 8% annual interest. He has $2,800 more to invest. At what rate must he invest the $2,800 to have a total annual interest of $628, okay? So for this one, you're going to do that same problem like what we did with number 2. I1 plus I2 equals 628. Okay. If you want to make your table just to see the values, I1, I2. Okay. So interest 1, PRT. So he invested $4,000. And that was at 8%, and it says annual, once again, for 1 year. I2, it says he has $2,800 more to invest, but we need to figure out what rate. Okay, so that's our unknown. All right, so in this case, X would equal rate to invest $2,800. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and plug those things in. 4,000 times 8% plus 2,800 x equals 628. If I multiply these out, I get 320 plus 2,800 x equals 628. Subtract 320. 2,800x equals 308. I'm going to divide by 2,800, and I end up getting that x equals 0.11. okay? And so when I'm here, because I'm trying to figure out the rate, remember that my rates need to be as a percent. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this and multiply it by 100. So I end up getting that the rate should be at 11%, okay? This is very similar to number 6.